I've just started a series, and that series is going to cover investments, all of the most popular investments, and some investments you might not even know about. I'm going to draw stuff out for you. I'm going to run some numbers for you, and I'm going to show you how to pick a stock, how to really pick a stock. Hopefully, you'll learn a little bit from it. So let's start. What's a stock? A stock is an ownership interest in a company. When you buy a stock of, say, Apple, and I'm not recommending Apple, I don't recommend individual stocks on social media. Just that's not what I do. I do it on a personal basis. And so if I mention a company today, I would strongly encourage you to go consult with your financial advisor, or go to your broker, or go online and do some more research, because even though I may talk about certain specific stocks, they may not be right for you in where you are in your life. And so please don't necessarily take these recommendations and go buy right away. I use the names of stocks as a generic way, just to talk about as an example. So if you own a piece of Apple, it means you will own a stock of Apple. So when Apple sells more phones, Apple has revenue. Revenue is how much they make from, they sell a phone for $1,000, you make $1,000. And Apple has expenses. Say Apple has those beautiful stores, they hire people, they have equipment, they have the cases, they have a lot of costs. So let's say the cost is 60%, as an example. The remaining $400, so the $1,000 revenue, $600 expenses, the remaining $400, that's the profit. You as an owner get a little piece of that profit. And that's what a stock means. A stock means you own a piece of a company and you get a piece of the company's profit whenever they sell. So a stock is an amazing way to make money. While I call it sleep money, because you're not working for it. Your money is working for you. What you're doing is you're basically in bed, drinking coffee, eating noodles, and those tens and tens of thousands of Apple employees are working really hard around the world to make money for you. And so that's what it means to own a stock. Now, when you buy a stock, you don't want to buy something that you sell tomorrow, or the day after, or next year, or the year after. When you buy a stock, you're buying into a company, a real life living organism with a lot of people working in it. So when you pick a stock, don't pick the fly-by-night stock, the one that you heard about in the dentist's office or in the lunchroom, or the one your colleagues are talking about. You want to do the research yourself. I'll show you how to do the research. I'll show you the things that you should look at. I'll show you how to pick really quickly a good stock or a not so good stock. And then I'll throw everything I've just said out the window and I'll ask you, well, should you even be buying stocks? But first of all, let's talk about the things you should look for when you buy a stock. The first thing is you want to understand the company, or you want to understand the product or the service they sell. You don't just buy a stock you don't understand. To look at a company, you have to understand the company. So before you buy a stock, make sure you understand the company, you understand the products, and you understand what they sell. When you pick a stock, make sure that stock is recession proof. So no matter what happens, people are still going to keep buying the stock. And I'll give you an example. Pampers for babies. A recession happens, what are you going to start using for your baby? Toilet paper? No. You got to use those Pampers. So those companies that make Pampers, the consumer products companies that make Pampers, are good to buy if you're looking at that aspect of buying a stock, which is recession-proof. The types of companies you want to buy are those companies that have a sustainable competitive advantage. The worst thing that can ever happen to a company is competitors, you start making money, competitors come in, and they drive you out of business. Why? Because they can offer the stock cheaper, maybe a better service or whatever. Apple, and I've used this example before. If you want to change to Samsung, guess what? You have to change. Apple has this thing called apps, right? And there's tens and tens and tens of thousands of apps. If you open up your phone, I bet you got a couple of dozen apps. I got like 45 or 50. If I switch over to Samsung, I would have to get rid of all these apps and re-download all my 45 or 50 apps. I don't want to do that. It's too much work. That is a sustainable competitive advantage because it's painful. You can change, but it's painful to change. Consistent earnings. You don't really make a lot of money until you sell the stock. That's called capital gains. But in the middle, while you own the stock, every year You want to be earning an income to compensate you for owning the stock. And that's where dividends come in. That's called dividends. You want a company that's paying you increasing dividends every year. It's the same thing with earnings, same thing with your salary, same thing with money you make. You want it to be going up every year. As a result, you want a company that pays you also somewhere around 8% growth rate in dividends every year. And that's a good rule of thumb. Low debt. You don't want a company that has too much debt, too much leverage. The bank needs their money, right? They need their money on time. So if you buy a company that has a lot of debt and you have a recession, there's a good chance the company goes bankrupt. So you want a company with low debt or lower debt. A maximum should be somewhere around 70% of the equity capitalization. You don't want a company that has too much debt so you don't lose money. Credit rating. This goes hand in hand with debt. Now, you want to stay away from companies that have less than BBB minus rating. All those things I've said, you want to do research on. But if you didn't have any time, and if you close your eyes, peek, and pick a stock, I can give you 1 or 2 rules of thumb about how to pick a good stock and how to pick a stock that's too expensive. 2 rules of thumb where you can pick a stock within, I'd say, 3 or 4 minutes. The first is price earnings ratio to growth rate. Let me explain. You're going to compare 2 numbers. One is the PE ratio, and the second is the growth rate of a company. The PE ratio, what we call price to earnings ratio, is a multiple that most professional advisors use to value a stock. So, for example, you want to buy a piece of land in, say, Texas, and it's $200 a square foot. You want to buy a piece of property in LA, so maybe it's a little bit more expensive. So you pay $400 per square foot is how you judge real estate. The same thing with a stock. So when you take the price of the stock, how much it's trading at, and you divide it by the earnings per share, that's a formula we call price over earnings, PE ratio, price to earnings ratio. You just learned something today. Now, what's the price? If you go on your computer, type in price of Google, price of Apple, that's the price. That's how much it's trading at. What's the earnings? The earnings is the revenue of the company minus expenses, that's the profit, divided by the total shares outstanding. Then we compare that to how much we expect Apple to grow over the next 3 to 5 years. We want a stock whose PE ratio is equal to or less than the growth rate. That means you're getting a deal. If I have to pay more than the growth rate, then it's too expensive. I'm going to give you 2 companies today. One is called Micron. One is called Chipotle. Micron is a semiconductor company. You know how you have a computer or a phone? Inside of that, the engine of that computer, inside of that, it's called a microchip. It's a chip. Micron makes that, kind of like the same thing Intel does. And Chipotle, many of you love those burritos of Chipotle, right? And so Chipotle is it's a company where you go to buy food. Is Chipotle cheap or expensive? Just based upon our model of price over earnings versus the growth rate. Okay, let's look at it. So Chipotle, the stock price is currently trading at about $1,022, right? $1,022. I mean, sounds expensive, but be careful because you never really equate value to price. The price could be so different from the value. The price is just a reflection of how much it takes to buy a stock. The value is whether or not that stock is worth it or not. So they're 2 different things. What's the earnings of Chipotle? Chipotle's earnings are, as EPS earnings, that's price per share, is about $11.22. I'm sorry, it's $11.94 today. So if you take 1,022 and you divide that into this, you get $85.70. This is called the PE ratio of Chipotle. Chipotle is trading at 85.7. Now, let's look at the growth rate of Chipotle. How do we expect Chipotle to grow over the next, say, 3 to 5 years? The growth rate of earnings is about 54.7. Chipotle is expected to grow at 54.7 its earnings approximately every year over the next 3 to 5 years. This came from Angas, a research company we use. And it's currently trading at 85.7. Remember, if the PE ratio exceeds the growth earnings, by our model, is Chipotle cheap or expensive? It's a little bit expensive. So Chipotle is expensive. That's an expensive stock. Let's talk about Micron, right? Micron technology. And Micron trade close of market today was about 46. So price was about 46.7, somewhere around there. They closed at 46.7. The earnings is 2.02, right? So if you divide 46 by 2.02, what do you get? Micron is about 22.97. That's the PE ratio of Micron. How much is Micron projected to grow over the next 3 to 5 years? 46.57. So if the PE ratio is 22 and Micron is growing at 46, almost double, is Micron cheap or is Micron expensive? It's cheap. When you compare that to the growth rate, it tells you really quickly what's a cheap stock or what's an expensive stock. That's the first thing. That's the first way that, if you close your eyes, pick a stock. And you can do this analysis. You can look at the price of earnings, get the multiple, it's called the P ratio, get the multiple, and then look at the growth rate, the estimated growth. You can get this on Yahoo Finance. You can get it on any research, Google Finance. You can get all these numbers on Yahoo Finance. You can get all these numbers on Google Finance, right? The second thing I'm going to teach you on how to pick a stock is what we call it's a current yield, dividend yield versus historical yield. Let me explain. Do you remember what I said about dividends? Dividends are pieces of dollars, money that you receive, pieces of a company's profit. Company makes a profit, like Apple. It makes, say, $400 a phone, as an example. It pays you every year something, $50 or $80, just to keep you happy. You take that money, you put it in your pocket, or you reinvest it, which I recommend. If you don't need the cash flow, if you're not retired, reinvest your dividends. So we'll come back to that some other time. But dividends are very important. The reason why dividends are important is because they're cash flow that you get in your pocket every single year that you can count on. You can usually tell what's a good company and what's a bad company based on how much they're paying in dividends. So how can you tell whether it makes sense to buy a company based upon the dividends? There's this thing called a dividend yield. A dividend yield is very simple. It's the dividends, the annual dividends divided by price of the stock. How can you tell whether it makes sense to buy a stock based upon the dividends? Well, you look at the historical. You go back into history. You can get this on Yahoo Finance or any of the other portals finance portals out there. You look at the history of the dividends and you ask yourself, is the company paying me dividends now that are more than the historical dividend yield, or are they paying me dividends that are less? If they're paying you dividends that are more, that's great, right? That's good. You want that. You want the dividends to be growing. If they're paying you less, that's not so good. That's bad. So let me give you a few examples. I'm going to give you two companies now. One is AMC and one is AT&T. AMC is the entertainment company, the movie theater company. And the second one is AT&T. We all know AT&T. So AMC. How much is AMC paying in terms of dividends per year? 4.12, right? How much is the price? 4.66. So for those of you who are good at math, run those numbers real quick. The dividend yield, 2.54. Historically, this is the historical performance. This is how much they paid historically. It's 9.5. So they're paying you 2.54 now, and historically they paid you 9.5%. Why'd they cut my dividends? That's my money. Why would they cut my dividends? Something is going on. And of course, we know that because of Netflix, there's a big decline in people going to movie theaters. Also, COVID-19 and a lot of other things have caused them to have reduced their dividends. So this is not very good. So this means AMC in general is expensive, right? Let's look at AT&T. How much is AT&T's how much is the dividend they're paying you right now? Is 2.08. Remember, 2.08. They're paying you $2.08. Oh, and always remember the price. You have to look at the price of the stock. Remember, you can get this on Yahoo Finance. Price of the stock is 29.59. Right? What does this mean? AT&T is paying you about 7.18%. 7.18% is how much they're paying. What is the historical? Historical is 5.5%. So AT&T right now is paying 7% dividends, 7.18, and historically it's 5.5%. As a result, AT&T is cheaper. Why? Because they're paying me dividends. They're giving me money. They must be making money. My income is going higher. Look, I could just sit back. I don't care what happens to the stock. I mean, you do really, but I'm just saying. Who cares what happens? If I'm making 7%, if I invest my money, I'm making 7% every year. I'm cool. I'm happy. I'm happy with that. So is AT&T expensive or cheap? It is cheap. So this is another way for you to judge what to buy, whether a stock is valuable, it's a good value, or it's expensive. One is by looking at the price equity ratio versus the growth rate. The second is by looking at the dividend yield versus the current dividend yield versus the historical dividend yield. See you next week. Next week, we'll talk about bonds. Please don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you soon.